Great to be back. I'm, as it was said, from Scotland, and before I left Europe, my last job actually here, I was the General Secretary of the European Evangelical Alliance. And one of my passions and desires was to try to see churches and missions and Christian organizations unite together for a common vision for the continent and find ways together to synthesize and coordinate our efforts, not all do the same thing, but do it in the same spirit and with the same type of vision. And one of the things that intrigued me for many years has been this subject of hope. And I want to talk to you about this because it really has bearing upon us as Europeans, some of your guests from Australia, the United States, and your missionaries coming into the continent. So some of this will have a mixed relevance to you. But if you're homeborn, there's a particular disease, I think, that afflicts Europe that I'd like us to talk to about the human condition. John Stott mentioned many years ago at one of the early conferences relating to Lausanne about what he called was Euro-pessimism, a kind of a cynicism that was brooding in people's souls, where every time an idea came up, and sometimes Americans were looked at somewhat naively because they would always come over with great plans and grand strategies and all kinds of ideas with a can-do mentality, and Europeans wanted to know, well, you don't know how hard it is here, and you don't know why we should do that, and what are all the reasons. And if the American was saying, how can we get on with it, European was having a million reasons trying to justify why we should do it in the first place, and giving maybe another 30 reasons as why it wasn't possible because of all the political, social, cultural heritage and human blah, blah, blah. So these kind of issues compounded with what I would call postmodern cynicism. Postmodernism has unleashed a sense in which all of us think we see through things now. We see through every motive, we see behind every text, we question the psychology, the genetics, the heritage, the politics of everything. And so we become so adept at seeing through, we lose the ability to see. So we no longer can read the lines because we read between the lines and we don't pay attention to what the lines are saying anymore. And this cynicism affects Christians too. It affects churches, it affects Christian organizations. And what that does often for leaders in any organization, where every decision is contested, where every idea is thrown into equation, where you have to justify anything, is discouragement, let's be honest. I mean, you're a leader or a pastor or a person and you feel you're constantly having to defend yourself. You find this brooding discouragement in their soul. I mean, you do your job, you still believe in God, you still read the scriptures, you still pray, but yet there's this sense of, you feel like you're running uphill through treacle or molasses. You're always being pulled down by something. So where does hope come into this equation? Well, some passages to begin with. Romans chapter 8, 24 and 25. In Romans chapter 8 is one of the great eschatological passages. We put that together with 1 Corinthians chapter 15. But just these two verses initially of 24. For in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. So a very key text in our understanding that hope is central to the Christian story. In fact, the three pillars, the three legs of the Christian stool, faith, hope, and love. You take any one of them away and our stool doesn't stand. So you need faith that is hopeful and loving, and they must all work together in a synergy. You take any one piece out and you're going to have a sickness. You can diagnose your spiritual life on these terms. You can wake up this morning, am I trusting God? Am I hopeful in God? Do I feel loved? Am I being loving? These are tests we can apply. In Romans chapter 15, verse 13, towards the conclusion of the epistle, the apostle says, now may the God of all hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Specifically calls him the God of hope, tied, of course, to the fact that God is both the creator, but he's also the redeemer, and ultimately he is the sovereign one. Now, you don't need to look very far in the book of Psalms to find that this is a theme. There's not just psalms of lament and sorrow and suffering, but there are many times when the psalmist speaks and he's actually having a conversation with himself. In Psalm 42 and verse 11, you hear this cry of someone struggling. You've probably done this many times. You may have even done it already during the conference. Why are you in despair, O my soul? Why have you become disturbed within me? Hope in God, for I shall yet praise him, the help of my countenance and my God. Why are you in despair, O my soul? Have you ever had days like that? Days as a father, as a husband, as a wife, as a mother, as a father, as a Christian leader, just despairing because you can't see a way forward in life at times. Even as a Christian, you believe in God, you know He's there, but it's like the heavens have become closed or things just don't seem to be working out. And yet here you are leading the charge. You're the head of the organization. You're the department head. You're the one that's supposed to be rallying the troops. Alexander Pope famously said, "Blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed." James Haggerty said, "One day I sat thinking, almost in despair. A hand fell on my shoulder and a voice said reassuringly, 'Cheer up, things could get worse.' So I cheered up and sure enough, things got worse." Now, with the humor, we feel it, don't we? Because we understand it. We understand this sense of that life basically hurts at times. And even when it's going well, it doesn't always go well and bad things happen and so forth. Lewis Smedes, a very gifted American pastor, he's dead now, but he said this: "Hope is bred in the bone. Our spirits were made for hope the way that our hearts were made to love and our brains were made to think and our hands were made to make things. Our hearts are drawn to hope as an eagle is drawn to the sky. A life instinct is what Carl Menninger called hope. Keep hoping, you keep living. Stop hoping, you die inside." And those of you involved in pastoral counseling ministry know that this is absolutely essential. If a person gives up hope, we're in a very difficult place. If a marriage gives up hope, you're in a difficult place. When a Christian organization or a church gives up hope, you're in a difficult place. So the idea of hope and its centrality can't be emphasized enough. So what do we mean by hope? The Webster Dictionary, and I'm deferring to the Americans on this one since I'm living there at the moment, calls it to cherish a desire with an expectation of attainment. So hope is to cherish a desire with expectation of getting something. So you hope for something. I can remember those emotions as a child. One of my favorite times in Scotland. Scotland gets very dark in the winter. Any part of Northern Europe, the Scandinavians know what we're talking about. I mean, it gets light at 9 o'clock and it's night again at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So winters are long, but Christmas was special. And you know, Christmas, in Britain, you know, you can think about the Christmas tree and Cadbury's chocolate and presents under the tree, and there's going to be a chicken or a turkey cooked and great food, and everybody's going to be happy and would have fun. So there was always the hope, and like summer holidays coming around, knowing that you'd finally be released from school and you could go out. Hope is an expectation about the future. Now here's Richard Balcom and Trevor Hart, two theologians, talking about hope again. Hope is among those capacities or activities which mark off the territory of the distinctively human within our world. The quest for meaning, for truth, for goodness and beauty is closely bound up with hope as an activity of the imagination in which we seek to transcend the boundaries of the present, to go beyond the given, outwards and forward in search of something more, something better than the given affords us. A person leaves a job, a church starts growing, a ministry is born when someone has hope for something new. There's a sense of there's something out there, and hope is both a propelling but a pulling force in our life to get us to do something. Again, here's Lewis Smedes. He says, hope is born the moment that we believe that the good things we wish for and imagine having are possible for us to have. The odds may be against us, but hope does not calculate the odds. All hope needs is a belief that what we hope for is possible. It's interesting. Some of you have probably gone to Auschwitz. I'd been there many, many times. My first time to Auschwitz was about 30 years ago when it was just during the communist years. And it wasn't as all cleaned up as it is now then. I remember walking through it in the dark and going through the snow and the ice, and imagine those people that were there, that died, that suffered. And there was a bookstore, so I went in and I picked up a couple of books of poetry written during the time of the suffering. One by a lady called Helena Birnbaum, and one of the books was called Hope is the Last to Die. And Viktor Frankl, the famous psychiatrist who wrote the book on founder of logotherapy, Man's Search for Meaning, hope was the key issue in Auschwitz. There were people that survived because of hope, because they saw beyond it, because they imagined a life after it, because they could transcend the suffering beyond it. So hope is a huge issue. But why is it so hard? Why is it hard in our lives? Why is it hard? Hope in the arena. Because things like discouragement, disappointment, and despair, these are constant, as are false expectations. How many times have you received or given false hope to people? You promise something you can't deliver. You've been promised something that was not delivered. You hear someone coming and maybe you're struggling with a ministry and you're wanting finances, and some person came from Korea or the United States or something and it all looked so good and you thought, well, yes, I'm going to get funded, and they left and you were thinking, oh boy, we're going to have this, and then 3 months later, silence, 6 months later, next year, and then someone else comes through and says, tell me, do you have any needs? And bit by bit, the hope dies because people keep coming, selling, but never giving, and you wonder if anyone ever really cares. And having hope in the midst of management decisions and life decisions is difficult because we are attacked constantly. The modern world promises so much and it always delivers less. And for some people, even Christians, pastors included, doubt becomes their operational style. Listen to this again from Lewis Smedes. Worry, he says, is hope's bothersome twin brother. And so it seems in life, right? Any of you have a problem with worry, anxiety? It follows me around wherever I go, so if you don't have it, you're doing well. Worry is forever trying to take the wind out of hope's sails. Hope is forever resetting its sails to whatever wind there is. Sometimes hope gets the better of worry. Sometimes worry pins hope to the mat. But we are stuck with both our fighting siblings. In other words, hope and worry seem to live together. And they do, don't they? They do in all of our lives in many ways. The pressure of life, the circumstances of real events pressing on us, the impacts of others' problems, concerns, and needs in us. We're social creatures. So people with staff, people in problems, people outside the organization, their worries, we may not have any at the time, but someone else is dumping theirs on your soul. Or your own internal struggles. Am I good enough? Can I do this? They're asking me to lead this project. They're asking me to build this. I'm just not sure I can do it. I don't know if I've got the fortitude, the prayer, the skills. And so I struggle. So hope is essential to leadership, but it's struggle. But my first point I really want to make here is that it's essentially a theological issue. Let's first do what Stephen Covey says, which is begin with the end in mind. So let's look at the end. The end of what? History. If you turn to Revelation chapter 21. Now, I don't know where your theology is, and I don't actually care about the book, whether you're post, pre, or any millennial, or anti-millennial, or whatever. Fill in the blanks. That's up to you. The fact is that Revelation gives us pictures of things that we don't have fully an understanding of. We know we've been giving scenarios, if you like, about the future, but we know that something real is going to happen. And in Revelation 21, you've been hearing what John is saying. We've been talking about this idea of the cities and the marriage and the bride and the wife. Well, that climaxes, doesn't it, in the book of Revelation in 21 here. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away. There is no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men. He will dwell among them. They shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning, or crying, or pain. The first things have passed away. And he who sits on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. And he said, Write, for these words are faithful and true. Isn't this a picture to live for? That one day there will be a world where there will be no more sorrow, no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering. These are part of the first things. So eschatologically, we have a vision that one day all that we see, all the disorder will be healed. Martin Luther was asked the question, if you knew that Jesus was coming tomorrow, what would you do? He said, I would plant a tree today. In other words, normal life was redeemed by the future. It was not eradicated. Evangelicals have often used the future as an escape mechanism. It's all going to burn, so let's just go on with sort of saving souls. We're kind of neo-Gnostics in our life. And yet the whole idea was that the future was an impulse pulling us towards a better future. So where is our hope based? Well, first of all, it's based on the fact the earth is the Lord's. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Those were the favorite scriptures of Abraham Kuyper, the founder of the Free University of Amsterdam. Our times, the scripture says, Psalms are in his hands. So God is the source of all hope because he has the beginning, the middle, and the end in his hands. Secondly, because redemption is accomplished and applied. In Colossians 1:13 and 14, we've been given reconciliation through Christ. We know that we are restored, and so both the earth is his and redemption is ours. David Aikman, a Time journalist and a Christian, said this, The good news of the gospel is not simply about forgiveness for sins and escape from the wrath of God. It's about connecting believers with something absolutely extraordinary that God has prepared for them in the future. It's about the glory of having within oneself the source of all truth, all love, all holiness, all righteousness, all forgiveness, and all healing. The Messiah himself, dwelling in us. Christ in us, as Colossians says, the hope of glory. That hope, that seed of hope is in you. The arrabon, the down payment of the Spirit that will carry you through safely to completion. So we're gifted with new life and a new kind of life. But the third reason for hope is that the future is in his hands. The future will not be more of the same. It's not like the modern idol of progress, because we know that the future is not going to go well. Am I right? If we look at the book of Revelation, you have violence in a little beginning in the Old Testament. By the time you get to Revelation, you have enormous power and you have enormous violence. You have the world under a global system of some kind. You have a catastrophes mounting up until God intervenes. So it's not going to be democracy. It's not going to be economics. It's not going to be healthcare. It's not going to be our systems, our plan. It won't be the European Union or the United Nations. It won't be NATO. It won't be any of those things. It won't be the World Economic Forum. They will not have the answers. They will all be involved in the narrative, in the story, but they do not have the decisive word. So where does the word lie? Richard Balcom and Hart. The Christian hope is finally invested not in an extension of or a development from the conditions, the actualities and potentialities of the present order of things, but in a decisive activity of the God who in the beginning called this same order into being out of nothing, and who promises us a transformation of our situation so radical as to be pictured under the figure of a wholly new creative act on God's part. In other words, the end is going to be like the beginning. Just as in the beginning God spoke, and order came out of chaos, creation ex nihilo, that God spoke the world into existence, at the very end, there's going to be yet a further decisive act where God says, it's over and it's done. Now, what does that mean? I know that may be a bit theologically too abstract. It doesn't have anything to do with reality, but theology does have to do with reality. If we don't do theology, we're not doing reality. If we're in a God-created world. So we have to think about the theological nature of existence. We have to think about the ethical and aesthetic and other entailments of that. And then practically our strategy, what we want to do. As Christians, we often want to keep at the bottom end of this. What's our activity? Disconnected from theology. Just supported by a few proof texts of Bible verses. Hope means that our past is secure because Christ has forgiven us. Our present is covered because Christ is with us. Our future is guaranteed because Christ promises to bring us home safely. So that's why leadership, therefore, as Christians, needs to be hopefully based. It needs to be hopeful in its orientation. It needs to be hope as a springing out of our heart. Here's a non-Christian voice. Jonathan Sacks, or Lord Jonathan Sacks, the chief rabbi of Britain, said this: there is such a thing as an ecology of hope. There are environments in which it flourishes and others in which it dies. You know what that means. Some of you have been in toxic churches. Some of you have been in toxic Christian organizations where the morale is so bad, where people talk about each other, where crises are handled badly, where emails shoot back and forward, where reputations are assassinated, where people get beaten up, not physically necessarily, hopefully, but they certainly get beaten up verbally. And so what it does is it just makes work a toil, a tragedy. And how do we bring hope into a situation like that? So let's talk about the experience of life. Bad things do happen to good people, don't they? And good people do bad things. Even good leaders do bad things. And some of you have been some of those good leaders doing bad things at times to others. You've not listened, you've not cared, you've not maybe given hope when you could. You've been maybe more interested in control, your ego or your success. And we all have been there. That's a part of the human condition. It's also a part of why we have to be under spiritual discipline, isn't it? To grow as a leader. But disappointment is a stealth weapon of the enemy of souls. It's a very, very powerful thing. In Psalm 120, in the Psalms of Ascent, and many of you know these Psalms. These are the Psalms that were sung by the people of God as they're journeying up to Jerusalem. They're singing the praises of God, and so you can imagine going up to the annual festivals and they'd be singing these, not choruses, but prayers and songs. But part of this reflects the emotions of the journey of life, the spiritual journey of God's people. And in Psalm 20, where 5 through 7, it says, "Woe is me, I sojourn in Meshach, for I dwell among the tents of Kedar. Too long has my soul its dwelling with those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war." That's a statement of weariness, of someone, I'm on the spiritual journey, but the paper around me seems to be about conflict, and all they want to talk about is all these hard things, and it gets through after a while, doesn't it? You know, as I'm aging, I turn the news off a lot more than I turn it on these days, because it's just so depressing. It's not that I don't want to be on it. I mean, I stay informed as best I can. I read magazines, I go on the internet, I stay up with it, but I don't dwell on it. In some places, especially in the United States, you're obsessed. You have 24/7 cable news and analyzing and over-analyzing and oh, good grief, it just gets enough already. Because all you see is problems and it gets into the soul. And sometimes as a Christian in a Christian organization, Eugene Peterson used this phrase, I feel that my role is to work in the complaint department of the house of the Lord. Well, why is it broken? Why does God do this? How come God doesn't, why isn't the Bible more clear? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering? Why didn't God answer my... You never have those kind of questions, right? Or you never maybe make those questions yourself. But when that gets onto you, it begins to wear a bit. But secondly, then come the personal downsides of this. Moses, when he was called, he struggled. Elijah, I mean, here's this prophet of the Lord, and he finally comes up against a woman that's far more powerful, Jezebel, and he goes running off, and, oh, poor me, it's just me all alone, but, you know, maybe Jezebel's going to get me, so take me home. David, fleeing King Saul, being chased around the wilderness. And many of these psalms were written in the experience of David fleeing from a king who's out to kill him. And David hasn't done wrong. And David has a calling from God. David is in the will of God as he's being chased by the king to be killed. That's kind of hard to understand theologically, isn't it? And sometimes we can be in the will of God and bad things can still be happening. And maybe God's doing something in our life and forming us. Lewis Smedes puts it this way. We choose to wait when we want what we wait for. We have to wait for it because we can do nothing to make it happen. We're able to keep waiting for it only as long as we keep believing it will happen. Waiting is the wanting, in the helplessness and in the believing. But it is the helplessness that makes the waiting so cold, so lonely, and sometimes so paralyzing. And I don't know where you're at as leaders, and I don't mean to presume upon you, but I do know that there are times in our life, there are times as a leader when life goes well and everything is, you just feel you're flying high, that everything, you know, the team works, the business works, everything seems to be flowing. And there are other times when it doesn't seem that anything goes right. Just life is pressure, and that weighs upon us. And this is where we need friendships, we need accountability, we need honesty, we need other leaders who you can talk to. I mean, one of the things that this place will give you is there's someone here who's going through what you're going through. So you need to reach out to someone from another culture, someone that just will take 5 minutes to talk to you, pray with you, and to, again, raise that specter of hope, that there is hope, that there's a way through this darkness. There's someone that can pray. I don't need to walk alone. I can be connected. But there are times in your life when hope gets lost and clouded, and I've been there many times. I'm a kind of puddle-glum personality. I can overanalyze things and get down into the basement and then keep going. And I mean, I think that's partly a European temperament type of thing, you know, just dig and dig further. But one of the things that affects is this cynical thing, and that it has disturbed me of late as I've been traveling around, and I see this. Americans tend to be generally more optimistic, but because of the effect of the postmodern American culture, you're seeing this cynicism rise in America like we've had in Europe for quite a long time. And it's becoming more and more pronounced. It's in the television, it's in the media, and it's coming in the church. People think because they don't control the White House, or because they don't control the economy, or in Europe because we don't have power or influence, whatever it is, we begin to doubt things. Here's Wilbur Caldwell, an Atlanta journalist, and he talked about this. He says, idealism is fostered by hope. Realism is fostered by experience. Skepticism is fostered by uncertainty. And cynicism is fostered by disappointment. So it comes full circle, for at the root of all disappointments lie the trampled remains of hope. The person who is cynical and despairing is a person whose hope has been shattered somewhere, or they've just given up that hope isn't even possible. But that's not an option for a Christian. Not if it's theologically based, not if it's rooted in God, but it may be where we're at existentially. It may be where we're at because of circumstances. So let's think about this. Hope doesn't depend on circumstances if we begin to put our eyes in the right place. During the communist years, many wondered if anything would ever change. How many here are from former socialist countries or in the former Soviet Union? Yeah, so a good number. And some of you remember it, some of you were children, some of you lived through it, and some of you just saw the tail end of it. But it was a very real thing. Your parents, your grandparents, and so forth know what it was like living with that brooding grayness, with an authoritarian power, with life with limits and limitations, and constantly living. And you're not alone in terms of circumstances in the world. David Aikman cites the example of Václav Havel. He was one of my favorite Eastern European leaders. He wrote Charter 88 in the Czech and became, of course, he came out of a prison, ended up being in the Velvet Revolution and became the first president of the Czech Republic. But this is what Havel wrote. He says, either we have hope within us or we don't. It's a dimension of the soul, and it's not essentially dependent on some particular observation of the world or estimate of the situation. And that's pretty impressive for a man who was living under communist domination in the prison situation with no expectation that it was going to change. Nobody knew, the CIA didn't know, and all the pundits of the world didn't know that communism was going to collapse. It came down very quickly when it did come down, but it didn't look like it at the time. Havel wrote a lot of writings, but he was writing letters regularly to his wife Olga from prison. And listen to what he says in this. He says, hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. So here he had this transcendent ethic, this understanding. It wasn't success or pragmatism, but there was something ultimate. Now, James Sire, who was a Christian philosopher, actually wrote to Havel repeatedly because it seemed he was right up at the door of being a Christian. And he was, because he was a kind of a Platonist in philosophy, but he just wouldn't make that personal because there were lifestyle issues he didn't want to change. But it was so interesting that as an unbelieving man, he could get this close, and he saw the power of hope as an essential issue. I want to give you a couple of examples from history, just generally. You can think about William Wilberforce. How many of you know that name? Certainly people probably from the British Isles know that Wilberforce was Wilberforce was raised in born to be a part of the aristocracy of Britain. He was raised in a privileged family. He was an Anglican Christian. He was quite devout, but his mum and dad had a success plan for him. And so he met these nutty Christians called Methodists, which mum and dad didn't like because they were enthusiasts. They took the Bible seriously. They believed too deeply. They wanted him to be Christian. They wanted him to be moral, but they didn't want him to be a fanatic. And so they sent him off into clubs in different places, not like today's clubs, but, playing cards and doing other things, and quickly lost the affection for his Christian life, goes to Cambridge University and basically lived the life of a young student, not taking his studies seriously, but then came to a very profound faith. And when he came to faith, he immediately wanted to do what he was being marked out for public service. He wanted to do what a lot of young people think they have to do, which is work in the church. So he sought advice from a man called Isaac Newton, who many of you will know was the writer of Amazing Grace. John Newton, the slave trader. But what happened with Wilberforce was that he understood that he was called back to public service, and he had a vocational calling of God to do two things: the abolition of slavery and the reformation of manners. Now, those were big things, because British manners, trust me, were out through the window. They were gin drinking. It was the time of the French Revolution in France. On that part of there was a lot of trouble going on. And so this was a huge task. And after 30-odd years, he saw the abolition of slavery and the end of that. So he took on the British Empire as an evangelical Christian. Dietrich Bonhoeffer took on Nazi Germany and died in Flossenburg prison. Hope doesn't always see the immediate outcomes, but it will see ultimate triumphs. Havel said it this way: the more unpropitious the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper that hope is. Hope is definitely not the same as optimism. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. So there's a strong moral dimension to hope. There's a strong understanding that doing the right thing, even when it doesn't seem to make sense practically, is still the right thing to do. And we do that. So how does hope act? Because hope's not passive. It doesn't sit back and just wait. It's not just feelings. It's not just, I wish it were so. It does things. Again, Lewis Smedes. He says, to see beyond what is, what can be, or to see within what seems to be what really is, this is imagination. There can be no hope without it. Surely a big part of leadership is imagination. You have to imagine scenarios, don't you? You have to imagine something growing. You have to imagine a project working. You have to imagine a book being written. You have to imagine a budget. You have to imagine all kinds of things. And that involves hope, because you're picturing the future. So once again, as leadership, it has to be hope-based in some sense. Faith, hope, and love work together, so believing, wishing, and imagining are parts of this. Here's Smedes. Hope comes alive with the birth of faith and stays alive as long as we keep believing. We hope only for what we believe is possible. No matter what we put our faith in, we will sing the song of hope only to the tune of faith. Hope, we could say, is faith with an eye to the future. Now, as a Christian, I am profoundly concerned because I think the apologetic power of hope is huge now in our present world. If you look at European news and you look at what's happened with the failure of the expectations of the European Union, it hasn't delivered for their friends. One of my friends came to see me the other day. He was a coal miner. He's worked 30 years in the mines here in Poland. We were good friends. I used to do Baptist camps in the fire station in this town. I used to preach to young people, have secret camps all across the country. So I was asking him, I said, Danik, tell me, how do you see Poland now under the European Union? How's it working? And he just, it's okay. I mean, he wasn't saying it was all bad. He was saying there were some good things, but a lot of the hopes have been disappointing. I think they were expecting a lot more, a lot bigger change, but now they see people becoming more selfish, more greedy, more private. Some of the old things, some of the community things disappearing. They're finding the international capitalism is not everything that it was knocked up to be. So hope is still an issue. People are turning to alcoholism, turning to pornography, turning to all kinds of relationships, destroying their life because they're looking for something they can't really find. This is what Smedes says. Hope comes, I said that, sorry, already. No, I wanted to quote rather Chantal del Sol. This is a French philosopher who's looking at the French society. An interesting France who pushes the idea of laïcité, which is secularism and a very, removing religion, trying to get it, and they tried to remove it from the European Union constitution, succeeded, I believe. But they also try to remove constantly this aggressive secularization that removes any religious influence. But it's not working very well in France. Listen to Chantal del Sol talking about French culture. She says, and she's talking about Europeans in the widest sense. She says, such is our situation at the turn of the century. The 20th century was born in the worship of the future, is now ending with shame for the past and contempt for the future. Having been too often betrayed by our expectations, we look upon any idea of promise as a virtual betrayal. If hope can be compared to a well in a garden, it is as if we now felt that the well has been poisoned. Now this speaks more to Europeans than to Americans, because this looks at the 20th century. The failure of Nazis, the failure of communism, the failure of all of these ideals. Some new social engineering project that would build the brave new world, and yet the brave new world always seems to end up looking a lot like the old world, just with more toys to play with in between. And so there is this sense of cynicism that can get into our soul. So let's think about Christian leadership. And let me ask you, do you contribute to pessimism or to the alternative? When your conversations, as you analyze culture, as you analyze circumstances, as you analyze, do you basically add to the despair by compounding it? Well, you think it's bad, let me tell you how bad it is. I mean, I found that we can have amazing pity parties. You get about half a dozen of us around a table and start talking about how bad things are. Oh no, let me tell you, I've got some horror stories. Oh, you think it's bad in Romania? You come over to Bulgaria. You think it's bad in Bulgaria? Have you been to Azerbaijan? Oh, you've never seen anything till you've been, and on we go. And a lot of the scenarios are real. They're with real people. They're with bad things. And well, how would you solve this? Oh, you're right, there are no answers. But thank God, one day we'll all escape. And so our waiting in leadership becomes for waiting for the rapture when one day it'll all be over. But we're not distributing hope in the present. How could leaders have hope in Rome? How could the church be a people of hope when the Roman Empire was not only against you, but it was a death sentence to believe in the first few hundred years of the church? But they did, or else we wouldn't be here. So let's think about this. There needs to be an attitude and an orientation with hope. It's not just an idea. It's not a, I believe in hope. Hope in hopefulness means to be hopeful, to have hope in my own soul. Biblical realism, though, also means we see life as it is. We're not utopians, so we're not, believing in some kind of a Thomas Kincaid plastic or painted up world. Sorry, that says an insult to Kincaid, but I mean, it probably is. My apologies. But it's not sentimentalism. Christian life looks at the world as it is. We're not determinists, we're not fatalists. Here's Balcom and Hart. Hope is both a matter of knowledge and of will. We know what happened before, we know what we desire. But it's characterized above all by the application of imagination and trust to a future which is essentially open and unknown. And this is the key. Part of knowing that hope is our life is that we don't feel trapped and determined. That there is an open pathway. That the God who moved in history will move again. That the God who answers prayer can answer prayer tomorrow. He may not do it in the first few days, but there's always an expectation that God might. And God possibly will. So we keep looking to him, and that's why it's the God of hope. That's why the psalmist cries out, hope thou in God. So how much time and energy is in nurturing projects based on hope? Look, people, we come into this situation. I remember right after the wall came down, talking to people who were looking in with factories that are closed down and all the work was gone, with villages that were running out with water supplies that were being polluted by old factories that were still bleeding into the water supply, and nothing much in terms of economics for people to live off. And we're talking to Christians who just felt crushed. And I remember once going with a group of them, and we put a cross up on a white sheet like that. And said, when you think of the cross, what kind of words come to your mind? And people started thinking, well, redemption, well, let's put that up there. Reconciliation, let's put reconciliation up there. We started getting all these words with renewal, restoration, rebuilding. And now we started thinking, well, what if you were going to start doing some of that towards some of these people or some of these situations? There's a broken down building. Maybe we'll restore it by painting it and maybe recovering it. There's a broken relationship between Hungarians and Romanians. And so maybe someone would reach out from both sides to try and bring some healing in the communities. Or there was some redemption. There's people here who are alcoholics that need to be met with Christ so they can be delivered from their alcoholism and find the gospel and get their families back in order. So we began to put up words that were words of hope because they're words of the cross that could be practically applied to strategies in ministry. But it meant we needed to unleash imagination. And we needed to look beyond the circumstances to what God was doing. And that means that Christianity is contra pessimism. One of the great voices in Christian history was the voice of Carl Henry. Some of you may know him, and some of you might be a new name. But listen to what he says. This is Carl Henry. He says, hope for the Christian is not divorced from faith and reason or from history. The forfeiture of hope is often the last blow before a person loses their mental stability. In the larger social context, a pervasive melancholy often presages the breakdown of a culture. So it's not just individuals and families that die. Cultures can die too. Hopelessness can become a part of this despair so deep that it loses all the creativity and all the energy. When you travel, and I do a lot, I'm sure some of you have done to the Far East, particularly these days, one of the things that strikes you, step off a plane in Singapore, you step off a plane in Hong Kong or in Thailand, energy, youth, vitality, a sense of youngness. And you come back to Europe and sometimes you feel we're tired and we're old and we're creaky and we're a bit worn down. We're sad. Because maybe the lights have gone out a little bit. And I believe it's the mandate because of God through the church to be agents of hope. Now may the God of hope fill you. Notice individually. Fill you with joy and peace in what? Believing. That you may abound in hope. You cannot give what you don't have. Got to get it in your own soul if you're going to pass it on down the chain. So here's where vision, action, and prayer are vital. Christianity offers a living hope and sufficient reason. It carries assurance that God is at once the Lord of the future and sovereign of the present. That's all the reason one really needs for confronting the very crumbling expectations of modernity with the enduring principles of Christianity. I don't know how much the role of promise plays in your life. But some of the times, the darkest times in biblical history are times when God intervenes. I want to give you one passage. If you'll turn with me, and if you have a Bible, you can turn to Isaiah 55. Some of the biggest visions of who God is are in the prophecies of Isaiah. And yet when you think of the situation, Israel has been judged severely. She's been chastised by her God. And from chapter 40 onwards, it turns, as you know, it starts out, comfort ye, O comfort my people. But I want you just to hear these words, and maybe in the European context, maybe try to hear these ancient words applied to your situation where we are today. Isaiah 55 and verses 6 through verse 13. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there without watering the earth, and making it bear and sprout, and furnishing seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so will my word be, which goes forth from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, without accomplishing what I desire, and without succeeding in the matter for which I sent it. For you will go out with joy, and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth into shouts of joy before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Instead of the thorn bush, the cypress will come up. Instead of the nettle, the myrtle will come up. And it will be a memorial to the Lord, for an everlasting sign which will not be cut off. And this passage, as you know, is tied to the messianic hope. It's tied to the deliverer, who's not coming, has come, and will come again. So this was an expectation that one would come, and it will change reality. And that's really what the gospel is all about, isn't it? So for hopeful and hope-filled leadership, what is really needed? Balcom and Hart put it this way: the wellspring for a distinctively Christian way of being in the world is to be identified in things which faith believes about the shape of God's future. The things which faith believes about the shape of God's future. Isn't that what management and leadership is about? It's about looking constantly to the future. You're constantly forward-looking, plans, dreams. How much does the text, how much does Scripture, how much does the Word of God shape your plans and dreams for the future, that they can be hopeful and hope-filled and hope-bringing? And that's more of a question to you individually. This is where time, exegesis, discussion, and planning are vital. Again, what is can only finally be understood in the light of what will be, and thus God's future reaches back into the present and bathes it in a quite distinctive light, transfigure it, and generating alternative ways of being in it. So let me sum up, and then we can have some, well, I think plenty of time for Q&A, or at least a few minutes anyway. Hopeful leading. What does that mean? Hope breathes life into mere routines, and it's a source of ongoing inspiration. But the first thing we need to remember is that hope and optimism are not the same thing. There are a lot of people, you meet them, I meet a lot of people who are optimistic. They're just optimistic people, you know. How's your day? Oh, wonderful. For them, life is always wonderful. There are a few around of us who are the opposite. We're pessimists. Life is always, well, I don't know. How's life? Getting by, you know. So those are temperamental issues. But hope is not optimism. In fact, Dietrich and Alice von Hildebrand show the distinction between hope and optimism. They said that optimism is essentially a sort of inner dynamism, a propelling force which keeps one going, but it's simultaneously coupled with a sort of blindness, for the optimistic person does not see the objective character of a situation and then respond with optimism. They are optimistic on principle, and that very disposition blinds them to the objective character of the situation. Optimism can be compared to a fuel, and the very moment a person runs out of the fuel, his optimism comes to a sudden and unforeseen halt. But hope is different, because hope runs on a different fuel. Hope has a different trajectory, and hope has a different end. So hope works in historical, and these are worldview statements. I've been asked sometimes when you're in a university setting or you're talking to a group of people, what is it, how do Christians see the world? And sometimes you have to put in sound bites things that are obviously a lot more elaborate, but you put them quickly. So trying to understand the nature of reality, I like these three statements that help me to understand things that are going on around me. The first is that the world that is not the world that was. The world that is a damaged world. It's disordered, isn't it? When God made the world, the creation, it was originally created perfect. So this is a world plus addition. Sin has broken it. There's disorder. There is disruption. But the second statement is equally important. The world that is not the world that must be. So contra Richard Dawkins and all his Darwinistic crew that see evolution as absolute determinism, my genes is my destiny, everything is fate and deterministic, I don't believe that. Redemption has accompanied and implied. The Spirit can move, God can intervene, people can change. Not perfectly, not 100%, but really and truly. Action is possible. Therefore, Christians never accept fatalism. What is, isn't what must be. But the third piece of this is the important. The world that is not the world that will be. This is not the last word in human history. Death doesn't have the last word. Neither did Gorbachev, neither does Madonna, neither does President Obama, and neither does whoever. The last word is in one source, the King of Glory. And he will say, enough. He sums it up. So there's a new day coming, and that day affects the present, doesn't it? If we don't live with that eschatological horizon, if we don't live with that future coming to us, then we're left sometimes just with an open future that we think we're managing. And that means living with tension. Hope is a problem, isn't it? It is a problem, because I'm not suggesting that we all walk out here saying, oh, everything's going to be wonderful, we can all be happy clappy and, the life is going to be wonderful. It's not like that. We live with a tension between hope and disappointment. And it is a tension. And you must live with the tension. You can never resolve it. If you will not resolve the hope tension until you go home to be with your King, it will finally be resolved. But between now and then, you live with this pull both ways. And so I want to give you an excellent quote on this from Jürgen Moltmann, who I think captures this beautifully. He says, that we do not reconcile ourselves, meaning the church, that there is no pleasant harmony between us and reality, is due to our unquenchable hope. This hope keeps men unreconciled until the great day of the fulfillment of the promises of God. This hope makes the Christian church a constant disturbance in human society, seeking as the latter does to stabilize itself into a continuing city. Think Babel and what John has been sharing. Thus it will constantly crave the passion for the possible, inventiveness and elasticity in self-transformation, in breaking the old and coming to terms with the new. So one of the facts as Christians we can't be at peace is because we know the new age has not come fully yet. So we're restless. We're seeking. We're asking questions. We're looking for better ways of doing things. We're always trying to be creative, or we should be. So, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, our families, our churches, our communities need hopeful leadership. And that's why if there's only one piece of this you take away this morning, it would be Romans chapter 15 and verse 13. And may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit.